Ancient stories are not what they seem. We have long dismissed tales of gods and monsters as pure fantasy, the simple fictions of primitive cultures. But what if these myths held a deeper, more urgent truth? This is the historical mystery we are about to unravel. I will show you how to decode these ancient texts to uncover a lost library of real-world maritime knowledge. You will learn to see the epic poems and sagas you thought you knew as sophisticated navigational manuals, hidden in plain sight. Why would critical sailing routes be encrypted in a story about a one-eyed giant? How could a hero's fantastical journey preserve star paths across an empty ocean? The answers rewrite our understanding of early exploration. They reveal a forgotten science of memory, where survival itself depended on turning maps into myth. What do you think is the most important story we have yet to understand? This knowledge was not written down on any chart. To understand why myths became the perfect vessel for this wisdom, you must first grasp the immense challenge these ancient mariners faced. They sailed across open ocean with no compass, no sextant, and certainly no global positioning system. The horizon was a perfect, terrifying circle of water in every direction. Their only tools were their own senses, honed over a lifetime of watching the world. They navigated by the sun's daily arc and the unwavering pivot of the North Star. They learned to read the language of the sea itself, the direction of dominant swells that could persist for thousands of miles, and the specific patterns of waves rebounding off distant, unseen islands. They watched the flight paths of certain seabirds, knowing how far they would venture from land, and they deciphered the shapes of clouds, which could hint at the mountains or lagoons lying beneath them. This was a science of observation passed directly from teacher to student, a living library stored in memory and muscle. But this created a profound vulnerability. What happens when a master navigator falls ill? What if a storm claims an entire crew of experienced sailors? This intensely local, experiential knowledge could vanish in a single generation, taking with it the ability to find food, to trade, or to reach new homes. The survival of entire communities literally depended on making this fragile, practical information unforgettable. It had to be woven into the very fabric of the culture, into stories told and retold for generations. And that is where the power of myth enters the picture. The solution was a form of technology, but not one made of metal or stone. It was a technology of memory. For cultures without widespread writing, the human mind itself was the hard drive, and the grand, looping narrative of myth was the perfect operating system. Think about it, which is easier to recall, a sterile list of numbers and directions, or a vivid story about a hero escaping a one-eyed giant by clinging to the belly of a sheep. Our brains are wired for narrative. We remember characters, their emotions, their dramatic conflicts and narrow escapes. A dry instruction like sail east for 3 days until the swell shifts is fragile. But embed that instruction within a quest where the hero must journey for 3 days toward the rising sun, facing a trial only when the sea itself changes its mood and it becomes indelible. The supernatural elements were not mere decoration. They were critical mnemonic flags. A story about a deadly, all-consuming whirlpool named Charybdis is far more memorable and carries far more urgent warning than a simple note about a dangerous tidal current at a specific headland. The monster was the current, its legendary description, the sound of it swallowing the sea 3 times a day, could encode the timing of the tides themselves. This transforms how we read these ancient texts. We are no longer looking for literal truth, but for symbolic cartography. The epic poem becomes a topological map. The magical creature guarding a narrow strait is a beacon for a real-world navigational choke point. The description of a god's fiery chariot crossing the sky might precisely chart the path of a specific constellation used for steering. The narrative itself is the code, and its unforgettable, fantastical features are the keys that unlock a real-world survival guide for the open ocean. The most compelling test of this idea lies within one of the world's oldest adventure stories. Homer's Odyssey is far more than a foundational epic of Western literature. For centuries, scholars have debated its origins, treating it as a grand metaphor for the human journey home. But what if we read it with the eyes of a Bronze Age sailor? Suddenly, this tale of a lost king battling monsters and enchantresses transforms into a potential masterclass in Mediterranean navigation, a sequential guide hidden within a hero's desperate struggle to return. The central mystery becomes startlingly practical. Could the bizarre and specific order of Odysseus's encounters, from the land of the Lotus Eaters to the cave of the Cyclops, past the Sirens and between Scylla and Charybdis, actually chart a viable, if perilous, sailing route? Could each supernatural episode be a coded lesson about a very real shoreline, a treacherous current, or a necessary but dangerous stopping point for water and supplies? This is not about finding a literal island of one-eyed giants. It is about recognizing that the description of such a place, its hazards and the tactics to escape them, might preserve vital, hard-won knowledge of the sea. The Odyssey's power to captivate for millennia may stem from a dual purpose. On the surface, it is a spellbinding story of perseverance. Beneath that, for those who knew how to listen, it could have functioned as a resonant, unforgettable sailing manual, ensuring that the critical knowledge of how to navigate the wine-dark sea would never be forgotten as long as the story itself was told. To see how this works, we must sail with Odysseus into his first great trial, an encounter that seems like pure fantasy, but may hold the first key to this nautical cipher. The path of Odysseus leads him to a choice no captain would ever wish to make. Ahead lies a narrow channel, and on one side dwells Scylla, a six-headed monster who snatches sailors from the deck. On the other side churns Charybdis, a whirlpool that swallows the sea-hole 3 times a day. The instruction from the enchantress Circe is chillingly clear and utterly impossible. You must sail directly through, but steer closer to Scylla's cliff. It is better, she says, to mourn the loss of 6 men than to lose your entire ship and crew. This is not just a dramatic scene. It is a profound navigational parable that has echoed for millennia. For generations of scholars, the real-world location seems unmistakable: the Strait of Messina, the slender waterway separating the toe of Italy from the island of Sicily. This is a place where geography itself creates a nightmare for sailors. Powerful tidal currents funnel through the constriction, creating violent, swirling eddies. On the Sicilian side, specific rocky outcrops jut dangerously into the channel. The myth takes these genuine, terrifying physical phenomena and personifies them, turning a complex hydraulic and geological hazard into 2 unforgettable characters. Charybdis becomes the living embodiment of the vortex, its 3 daily gulps a poetic encoding of the tidal cycle. Scylla, perched on a cliff, is the anthropomorphism of the sudden, jagged rocks that can tear into a ship's hull. The genius of the allegory is in the choice it forces. Circe's advice is a brutal lesson in risk management, a core principle of ancient seamanship. In the actual strait, a captain cannot avoid danger entirely. The tactical decision is which hazard to engage. Do you risk the unpredictable, ship-swallowing currents farther out, or do you dare the known but deadly rocks closer to shore? The story encodes the correct, if heartbreaking, answer, advising the calculated sacrifice to avoid total catastrophe. This transforms the epic from a simple monster encounter into a preserved memory of a specific, critical sailing strategy for one of the Mediterranean's most treacherous passages. The myth ensured that the logic of survival in that place would be remembered long after the names of individual rocks and currents were forgotten. But the Odyssey's wisdom is not only about surviving physical threats. It also contains profound lessons on a more subtle, internal danger. After escaping the Cyclops, Odysseus and his weary crew are blown off course by a storm for 9 days, finally landing on a strange, idyllic shore. This is the land of the Lotus Eaters, a peaceful people who offer the sailors the sweet fruit of the lotus plant. Those who taste it lose all memory of home and all desire to ever leave, wishing only to linger forever in that pleasant, forgetful haze. Odysseus must drag his men back to the ships weeping and tie them to the benches to resume their journey. On the surface, this is a haunting parable about the seduction of oblivion. Yet through the lens of maritime survival, it takes on a startlingly practical meaning. For an ancient captain, the greatest threat was not always a monster or a storm. It could be a harbor that was too safe, a trade port that was too profitable, or an island that offered a life far easier than the grueling, uncertain existence of a sailor. The story of the Lotus Eaters encodes a critical piece of crew management lore. It is a narrative warning against the peril of stasis, the danger of losing the collective focus required to complete a long and difficult voyage. A crew that decided to settle in a comfortable place, or that became so engrossed in local trade they forgot their original mission, could doom the entire expedition just as surely as any whirlpool. The myth transforms this complex leadership challenge into a simple, unforgettable image, the man weeping as he is pulled from the shore, his mind clouded by a magical fruit. It taught generations of listeners and perhaps captains that the siren call of comfort could be as deadly as any rocky cliff, and that the duty of a leader was to constantly steer the collective will back toward the distant, essential goal of home. Odysseus finds his next refuge on an island that holds a different kind of peril. This is the domain of Circe, the powerful enchantress who welcomes his scouts with a feast, only to touch them with her wand and transform them into swine. They retain their human minds trapped in the bodies of beasts, content to wallow in her pens. It is a deeply unsettling image, one that has long been interpreted as a warning against surrendering to base desires. But through the lens of maritime survival, Circe's magic takes on a startlingly practical meaning. For an ancient sailor, the greatest threat was not always a storm at sea, but the endless, demoralizing calm. Imagine a crew reaching a distant island, only to find the prevailing winds have shifted against them. They are trapped, unable to raise sail for home. Days turn into weeks, supplies dwindle, and discipline erodes. Men who were once capable sailors could descend into listlessness, frustration, and a kind of animalistic idleness. Circe's transformation is a potent metaphor for this very real phenomenon, the soul-crushing experience of being wind-bound. Her island, then, might not just be a random magical location. Scholars have long speculated it could represent a specific, real-world stopping point along ancient trade routes, perhaps one of the Ionian Islands off the western coast of Greece, a known haven that also lay directly in the path of the powerful seasonal winds known as the Etesians. These northerly winds blow reliably across the Aegean Sea each summer, a double-edged sword for ancient mariners. They provided a powerful push for voyages heading south, but could become an impassable wall for anyone trying to sail north against them. Circe is not just a witch, she is the personification of this climatic force. Her power to release Odysseus from the spell, and later, her crucial advice about the dangers of Scylla and Charybdis, frames her as a keeper of essential knowledge. She represents the deep, localized understanding a captain needed, knowing not just the safe harbors, but the precise seasonal windows when the wind itself would either be your ally or your prison. To know Circe was to understand the rhythm of the sky, and to avoid the metaphorical transformation that awaited those who underestimated its power. Yet even after escaping all these perils, Odysseus could not sail himself home. He needed a final, crucial piece of the puzzle, a people who existed in the myth as the very embodiment of seafaring perfection. These are the Phaeacians, the legendary mariners who find him shipwrecked and, in a single night of miraculous sailing, deliver him at last to the shores of Ithaca. Their description is not just fantastical, it is a detailed blueprint for an ancient ideal. Homer tells us their ships are extraordinary. They have no need for rudders or steering oars, for the vessels themselves understand the thoughts and intentions of their crews. They move with incredible speed, cloaked in mist and darkness, and are unshakable, never coming to harm. Furthermore, the Phaeacians possess a profound power over the sea itself, with the ability to calm storms and smooth waves at will. If we strip away the supernatural gloss, what practical reality might this encode? A ship that needs no rudder could describe a vessel of such perfect, balanced design that it holds its course effortlessly in following seas, a pinnacle of shipwright craftsmanship. The idea that it understands human thought might be a poetic way of describing a crew working in flawless, silent unison with their craft, where every adjustment of sail and weight is second nature, an unspoken language between sailor and ship. This is not magic, it is the highest level of seamanship mythologized. Their ability to calm storms is perhaps the most telling clue. This likely does not mean they commanded the weather, but that they possessed an elite, guarded knowledge of it. They could have been masters of meteorology, reading subtle signs in cloud patterns, wind shifts, and animal behavior to predict squalls hours before they struck, allowing them to avoid bad weather entirely. Even more compelling, their legendary night voyage to Ithaca suggests they might have navigated by a sheltered, secret route, a coastal passage protected from the open sea's fury, known only to a guild of professional pilots. In a world where such knowledge was power and often livelihood, it would be preserved in lore as a magical ability. The Phaeacians, then, represent the ultimate goal, the preserved memory of a maritime culture that had mastered wind, wave, and wood, turning the dangerous sea into a reliable road. Their role in the story is profound. They are the final key, the specialized couriers who complete the journey that Odysseus, with all his cunning, could not finish alone. They symbolize the truth that in the ancient world, survival on the ocean was not a solo endeavor, but depended on a chain of knowledge passed down and perfected, until it seemed to the outsider like something truly divine. The Odyssey's coded wisdom reveals a pattern, but this was not a secret held only by the ancient Greeks. Across the world, a different civilization was performing a far more audacious feat of memory-based navigation, turning the entire Pacific Ocean into a highway. While Mediterranean sailors hugged coastlines and island-hopped, the Polynesian voyagers embarked upon journeys of thousands of miles across the open sea, reaching the most remote islands on Earth. They did this without maps, without written language, and without any metal tools. Their entire system of exploration, a tradition that populated islands from Hawaii to New Zealand to Rapa Nui, was built upon an oral library more sophisticated than any parchment. At the heart of this system was a mental model of breathtaking elegance known as the star compass. Imagine the horizon as a vast, invisible circle surrounding your canoe. Now picture anchoring that circle with the specific points where certain stars rise and set. A star like Arcturus would always break the horizon at one precise bearing, while the Southern Cross would mark another. The Polynesian navigator memorized dozens of these celestial signposts, creating a complete 360-degree compass in their mind, where every direction was defined not by an abstract north or south, but by the memory of a specific named star. This was not a static picture, for as the night progressed and the Earth turned, the navigator would mentally shift from one setting star to the next rising star, seamlessly walking their awareness around this celestial wheel to maintain a constant heading. This precise, dynamic astronomical data was the core of their science, but it could not survive as a mere list of coordinates. It had to be made unforgettable, woven into the very identity of the people. So this knowledge was embedded into the fabric of culture itself. It was encoded in rhythmic chants called oli, whose cadences held the sequences of stars and their associated winds. It was preserved in Kaihonua, the sacred genealogies that traced lineage back to the gods, and in those lineages, the names of ancestors were sometimes the very names of stars or constellations they used for navigation. Most powerfully, it lived in the stories of the great ancestral heroes like the demigod Moi or the navigator Hawaiiloa. Their epic voyages were not just tales of wonder, they were narrative maps. When a story recounted how Hawaiiloa sailed from Kahiki following the guidance of the star cluster Makali, the Pleiades, it was preserving a vital route. The star was not a distant light, it was a character in the story, an ancestor guiding the way. The myth was the vessel, and within it sailed the irreplaceable instructions for how to traverse a trackless ocean. To hear the chant was to review the course, to recite the genealogy was to recall the star path. This was how a civilization conquered the largest ocean on the planet, not with instruments, but with stories that held the sky itself in perfect, memorable order. The constellation itself became a story of creation. In Polynesian tradition, the demigod Maui is a central figure of innovation and daring, a trickster who performed impossible feats for the benefit of humanity. One of his most famous adventures is the tale of how he fished up the islands from the depths of the sea. The story varies across the Pacific, but its core is consistent. Maui, using a magical fishhook crafted from the jawbone of his ancestor, sails out with his brothers. He convinces them to paddle far beyond the sight of land, into the profound emptiness of the open ocean. There he lowers his enchanted hook, chanting powerful incantations. He feels a tremendous weight, and with all his strength, he hauls the line upward, pulling not a fish, but entire landmasses from the watery abyss, creating the islands that people would later call home. On the surface, this is a beautiful origin myth, explaining how scattered lands came to be in a vast sea. But through the lens of celestial navigation, every element of this story aligns with precise, practical knowledge. The key is the magical fishhook. Scholars and Polynesian navigators themselves have long identified this hook not as a simple tool, but as a specific pattern of stars in the night sky. In many traditions, Maui's hook is the constellation we know as Scorpio, its curved tail forming the perfect shape of a barbed hook. Or it may be the asterism known as the fishhook of Maui, which includes parts of Scorpio. This identification transforms the entire myth from a fanciful creation tale into a sophisticated seasonal almanac. The appearance of this celestial hook on the eastern horizon at dusk marked a very specific and critical time of year. It signaled the beginning of the voyaging season, when the prevailing winds and currents shifted into a favorable alignment for long, open ocean journeys to the north toward the Hawaiian archipelago. So when the chant recounts Maui convincing his brothers to paddle far from shore, it is encoding a vital instruction. The voyage must begin when the hook is seen. The magical incantations Maui recites are not mere spells. They are the memorized star paths, the chants that list the sequence of guiding stars to follow. The tremendous struggle of hauling the land from the sea is a powerful metaphor for the immense effort and uncertainty of a long-distance voyage. For weeks, the crew would see nothing but ocean. Their faith rested entirely on the celestial signs, on following the path laid out by the ancestors and the stars. The moment of landfall, of finally seeing the green peaks of a new island rising from the horizon, would feel exactly like a miraculous creation, like pulling solid earth from the endless blue. Thus, the myth of Maui fishing up the island served a dual, profound purpose. It explained the origins of the homeland in a way that honored the ancestors. But more urgently, it preserved the exact celestial trigger and the existential experience of the voyage itself. To hear the story was to remember when to go, what to look for in the sky, and to prepare for the arduous journey that would end in the miracle of finding new land. The demigod's feat was not magic in the abstract. It was the codified memory of humanity's most incredible navigational achievement. The Pacific was not the only ocean where myth charted the way. Far to the north, where the sea turns cold and the sun lingers low on the horizon, another seafaring culture faced a different set of terrors. The Norse sagas, those epic tales of Vikings and their voyages, are filled with accounts of sailing into impossible seas. They speak of a Hafjörðinga, a mighty ocean wall of water that could rise up and crush a ship without warning. They tell of venturing into a perpetual sea of mist and fog so thick a man could lose his own hand before his eyes, and of reaching lands of fire and ice, where mountains breathed smoke and glaciers groaned. For centuries, these were read as pure fantasy, the vivid imaginings of a people who believed in giants and gods. But what if we listen to these stories with the ear of a navigator? Suddenly, the fantastical descriptions begin to resolve into the stark, dangerous realities of the North Atlantic. The journey into the Sea of Fog is not a descent into a mythical realm. It is likely a stylized, unforgettable account of sailing toward the Arctic Circle. One of the most perilous phenomena a northern mariner could encounter is Arctic sea smoke. This is not ordinary fog. It occurs when bitterly cold air moves over relatively warmer seawater. The ocean literally steams, creating a dense, low-lying mist that clings to the surface of the water, drastically reducing visibility while the sky above may remain clear. To a crew accustomed to the sharp lines of fjords and coastlines, entering this silent, disorienting blanket of vapor would feel like crossing into another world. The saga writers, seeking to convey the profound strangeness and danger of this experience, called it a sea of mist. It was a navigational hazard of the highest order, and the story ensured no sailor would forget what awaited them if they sailed too far north. The tales grew from there, describing the lands found beyond this barrier. The accounts of a land where fire erupted from the earth and rivers of ice crawled to the sea are a near-perfect match for Iceland, a volcanic island dotted with geysers and vast glaciers. The sagas themselves, like the Landnámabók, meticulously document the Norse discovery and settlement of Iceland in the 9th century. The dramatic, supernatural framing was the mnemonic device. By describing Iceland as a land of elemental conflict, of fire and ice, the stories preserved its most defining and dangerous geographic features in a way no simple description could. A new settler would hear the tale and know immediately what to expect, and more importantly, what to avoid. The mist was the gateway, and the fiery land was the reward or the challenge that lay beyond it. This pattern of encoding reality within epic poetry continues even further west. The later Voyages to Greenland, a land truly dominated by a massive ice cap, fit seamlessly into this narrative framework. The name Greenland itself, Groenland, was arguably a piece of optimistic branding by Eric the Red, but the saga accounts of its settlement do not shy away from describing its harsh, icy interior. And the most tantalizing hints lie in the vaguest passages of all, mentions of lands even farther west, shrouded in fog and mystery. While the historical evidence for Norse voyages to North America is anchored at Elands Ox Meadows, the saga descriptions of these places, like Vinland, are often sparse and wrapped in ambiguity. It is possible that some of the more outlandish saga elements, stories of endless fog and strange currents, could be fragmented, exaggerated memories of encounters with the edge of the Arctic pack ice, or with the immense fog banks common off the coast of Newfoundland. The mist, once again, serves as the narrative symbol for the absolute limit of geographical knowledge, the point where the known world faded into a white, uncertain void. The Norse did not have the Polynesian star compass, but they possessed an equally powerful tool, the skaldic tradition of storytelling. In longships during the endless dark of winter, these sagas were recited and remembered. They were not just entertainment, they were the communal memory bank, a description of a towering wave that could encircle a ship, the Hafjörðinga, might encode knowledge of a specific freak tidal surge in a narrow channel. A story about a coast where the sun shone at midnight could preserve the vital fact of the midnight sun's navigational utility in the far north. By turning perilous geography into epic poetry, they ensured that the hard-won, lethal lessons of the North Atlantic would survive as long as there was a voice to tell the tale and an ear to listen. The Norse sagas speak of another tool, one that seems to belong entirely to the realm of magic. In the depths of winter or beneath a sky choked with storm clouds, their navigators are said to have used a mysterious sunstone. This was no ordinary rock. The texts describe it as a crystal that could reveal the hidden sun's position, even when it was completely obscured, guiding ships through the gloom with an almost supernatural certainty. For centuries, this was dismissed as pure legend, a poetic metaphor for skill or luck. How could a stone possibly see through solid cloud? The answer, when it finally emerged, was not magic, but a forgotten understanding of light itself. The key lay buried in the earth of Iceland, a transparent crystal known as Icelandic spar, a form of calcite. When you hold a piece of this crystal and look through it, something remarkable happens. The crystal splits light into two separate beams, a property known as polarization. On a cloudy day, even when the sun is a mere bright patch in the haze, the light scattered through the atmosphere is subtly polarized. By rotating an Icelandic spar crystal and observing the changes in brightness of the two beams, a skilled user can pinpoint the exact direction of the sun with an accuracy that rivals a modern compass. The procedure is methodical. The navigator would hold the stone up to the sky, slowly turning it, watching for the moment when the two images within the crystal matched in intensity. That alignment points directly to the sun's hidden disk. This transforms the mythical sunstone from a fable into a sophisticated, real-world scientific instrument. It was a tool born of acute observation, a technological solution to the most common and disorienting problem in northern navigation, the perpetually overcast sky. Its description in the sagas was not an exaggeration. It was a precise, if cryptic, record of a vital piece of equipment. The sunstone stands as perhaps the clearest proof of our central idea. It is a direct physical artifact of mythic memory. The story preserved the concept of the tool, and the geological reality of Iceland provided the material. Together, they validate the entire premise that these ancient narratives were vessels for practical, survival-level knowledge. When the Skald recited a verse about a captain using his sunstone to find his way, he was not just weaving a tale, he was passing down a technical manual for a technology that would not be scientifically understood again for 1,000 years. But the memory of the sea is even older than the Greeks or the Norse. To find the first threads of this idea, we must travel back to the very dawn of recorded storytelling, to the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Here, inscribed on fragile clay tablets over 4,000 years ago, we find humanity's first epic hero, Gilgamesh. His story is a quest for immortality, a journey that takes him to the ends of the known world. After the loss of his friend Enkidu, a grief-stricken Gilgamesh sets out to find Utnapishtim, the lone survivor of a great flood, who possesses the secret of eternal life. His path leads him to a final, terrifying barrier, the waters of death. The description is stark and unforgettable. The hero is told that these waters are fatal to touch. To cross them, he must use a special guide, a ferryman named Urshanabi, and he must cut and prepare 120 poles to propel the boat, being careful never to let his hands touch the deadly liquid. For generations, this has been read as pure myth, a symbolic boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the divine. But what if we listen to this ancient warning with the ears of a Mesopotamian sailor? The civilization of Sumer was not just a land of farmers. It was a society of merchants and explorers whose trade routes extended down the Persian Gulf and into the Indian Ocean. For these early mariners, embarking on a voyage southward presented a terrifying, very real problem. As they left the relative safety of the river deltas and ventured into the open saltwater sea, their most precious cargo was not gold or lapis lazuli, it was fresh water. In the relentless heat, with only the sun beating down on a wooden boat, the management of drinking water was a matter of life and death. The ocean that stretched before them was a vast, shimmering expanse of utter poison. To drink seawater, as we know, leads to a cruel and rapid decline, dehydrating the body even faster. The instruction given to Gilgamesh, "Do not touch the water," transforms in this light. It is no longer a mystical prohibition, but could be a core, memorized piece of maritime survival lore, starkly simplified into an absolute rule for an illiterate crew. Do not let this salt water contaminate your fresh supplies. Do not be tempted to drink it, no matter how great your thirst. The epic encodes this critical knowledge in the most direct way possible, by making the water itself an active, lethal agent. The specific detail of the 120 poles is equally revealing. This is not random. It provides a precise, countable task for the hero, a rhythmic, repetitive action that would be easy to remember and recite. In practical terms, it emphasizes that crossing this dangerous stretch requires immense, sustained effort, and that the only safe way to navigate it is by using tools, by maintaining a deliberate, measured distance from the peril itself. You do not sail these waters casually. You pole your way through with focused labor, keeping your hands and your fate away from the deadly sea. The ferryman Urshanabi himself may represent the specialized knowledge required for such a journey, the guild of pilots who knew how to make the crossing. So the oldest epic we possess might also contain one of humanity's first recorded sailing manuals. The waters of death were not a mythical obstacle, but likely a Mesopotamian term for the open ocean beyond the Gulf, a place where the simple, fatal mistake of drinking the wrong water could end a voyage forever. Gilgamesh's journey to find the flood survivor becomes, in this reading, a profound metaphor for the ultimate maritime quest, pushing beyond the lethal, known dangers of the sea in search of wisdom and salvation. The story ensured that the most basic, vital rule of ocean travel would never be forgotten as long as the epic was told. The story of Gilgamesh reveals a pattern, a way of thinking about the sea that echoes across millennia. Centuries later and a world away, another legendary voyage would follow a similar template, but this time the destination was not a mythical island, it was a very real and treacherous sea. The tale of Jason and the Argonauts, immortalized in the epic poem the Argonautica, is often remembered for its roster of heroes and its roster of monsters. Yet when you chart its course on a map, something startling emerges. The sequence of their adventures plots a near-perfect, logical sailing route from the Greek world into the heart of the Black Sea, a journey to the distant kingdom of Colchis in search of the Golden Fleece. This was not a random fantasy itinerary. It was likely a narrative map, encoding the perils and protocols of one of the ancient world's most lucrative and dangerous trade routes. The very first major obstacle the Argo faces is a powerful clue. Before even entering the Black Sea, a ship must pass through a narrow, turbulent strait, the Dardanelles, known in antiquity as the Hellespont. The Argonautica describes this passage not as a simple channel of water, but as the clashing rocks, the Symplegades. These were said to be towering stone cliffs that would crash together randomly, crushing any vessel that attempted to pass between them. Jason is advised to release a dove first, watching its flight to time the moment when the rocks recoil. The dove makes it through, losing only a few tail feathers, and Jason orders his crew to row with all their might, the rocks grazing the stern ornament of the Argo as they slip through. This is a vivid, unforgettable image, but it maps perfectly onto the real-world challenge of the Dardanelles. This strait is famous for its powerful, conflicting currents, created by the water exchange between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. For an ancient ship under oar and sail, timing was everything. A captain had to catch the correct tidal flow or face being swept backward or dashed against the rocky shores. The story of the Dove could be a poetic encoding of this very tactic, using a small, fast scout boat to test the current's behavior before committing the large vessel. The grazing of the stern ornament symbolizes the narrow margin for error, the reality that even a successful passage was fraught with risk. The clashing rocks were not a fantasy, they were the mythic personification of a notorious hydraulic hazard, a warning that entering the Black Sea required precise timing and nerve. Once through the strait, the Argonauts' journey continues along the southern coast of the Black Sea, and their encounters shift from natural obstacles to human ones. They come to the land of the Bebryces, ruled by a brutal king named Amycus who challenges all visitors to a fatal boxing match. This is not a random monster, but a story about a hostile coastal tribe. Historical records and archaeological evidence suggest the Black Sea coasts were dotted with various peoples, some welcoming to traders, others notoriously aggressive, exacting tolls or plundering ships. The episode with Amycus encodes a critical piece of social knowledge for a merchant captain. It signals a stretch of coast where the danger was not from rocks or waves, but from the people on the shore. The story provides a narrative solution, the hero overcoming the bully through skill and strength, which translates to the practical need for a crew to be prepared for conflict, to be able to defend themselves or negotiate from a position of power when dealing with unpredictable local rulers. It turns a complex diplomatic or martial threat into a simple, memorable duel. Further along, they encounter the Harpies, winged creatures who swoop down to defile the food of the blind prophet Phineas. This grotesque image serves as a powerful metaphor for a different kind of scarcity. On a long voyage, food spoilage was a constant, silent enemy. Weevils in grain, rancid oil, and spoiled meat could doom a crew as surely as any storm. The Harpies, who make food inedible, could represent this ever-present threat of rot and contamination, especially in the damp, enclosed environment of a ship's hold. The hero's battle to drive the Harpies away symbolizes the constant, vigilant struggle to preserve supplies, a daily chore elevated to a mythic conflict to ensure it was never neglected. Each of these episodes in sequence builds a layered guide. First, navigate the deadly strait, then beware of hostile shores. After that, guard your provisions fiercely. The narrative itself becomes a checklist of survival priorities for a voyage into the Pontus, the Black Sea, and what of the goal itself, the fabulous Golden Fleece. Colchis, located in what is now Georgia, was renowned in the ancient world for its extraordinary natural resources, especially its gold. Pliny the Elder and other writers later noted that local tribes used sheepskins to pan for gold dust in mountain streams, laying the fleece in the water so that particles would cling to the wool. The Golden Fleece, then, is likely a brilliant metaphor that condensed an entire region's economic identity into a single, magical object. It wasn't that a literal golden fleece existed, but that the most prized export of Colchis, its gold, was intimately associated with the wool trade and the skilled labor of its people. For a Greek audience hearing the epic, the quest for the fleece would immediately signal a journey to the land of golden wealth. The myth preserved the destination's value and its most famous commodity in a form that was irresistible to storytellers and unforgettable to listeners. Jason's entire voyage, therefore, can be read as a grand mnemonic circuit. It preserved the sequence of a real trade route, highlighted its specific and varied dangers, and glorified its ultimate prize, ensuring that the knowledge of how to reach the wealth of the East would survive in song long before it was commonly marked on any chart. The same impulse to map the unknown through story echoes in the misty seas to the far west of Europe. From the Celtic world, particularly Ireland, comes a distinct genre of voyage tale known as the Imram. These are not sagas of conquest, but mystical accounts of monks and heroes who set sail in simple curraghs, boats of animal hide stretched over a wooden frame, seeking a desert in the ocean, a place for spiritual retreat. Their journeys follow a hauntingly repetitive pattern. The voyager, often driven by a divine command or a deep yearning, encounters a chain of impossible islands, each one more wondrous or unsettling than the last. One island might be inhabited by giant, blissful birds singing sacred psalms. Another could be a floating crystal pillar, or a land where the residents are perpetually laughing, or a place shrouded in a pall of sorrow and mist. The sequence feels dreamlike, a spiritual itinerary through the soul's landscape. Yet, when you lay these descriptions alongside the practical realities of sailing north and west from Ireland, a compelling possibility emerges. Could the Imram be a deeply encoded record of early exploratory probes into the North Atlantic? The heroes in these tales are not just pilgrims, they are potential scouts, and each fantastical island might be a stylized, memorable report of a real landfall. Take the description of an island of birds, a place teeming with peaceful, oversized avian life. To a crew that had spent weeks on the open ocean, the sudden, overwhelming sight and sound of a vast seabird colony on a remote island like the Faroes would be a stunning, almost miraculous event. The memory of that cacophony and abundance, so vital for replenishing food supplies, could easily be preserved in lore as a paradise of holy birds. Another common motif is the island of fire or of smiths, where the sky is filled with the sound of hammering and the glow of forges. This aligns strikingly with the volcanic activity of Iceland, a place where geothermal vents and hot springs would present a terrifying and awe-inspiring spectacle to anyone from a non-volcanic region. The sounds of the earth itself hissing and groaning could be interpreted as the work of a supernatural smithy. Most haunting are the accounts of a floating, silvery island or a great, glassy mountain in the sea. For sailors venturing far enough north, the first sighting of a massive iceberg gleaming in the Arctic light would defy all previous experience. It would appear as a moving, treacherous, and utterly alien landform, a perfect candidate for mythologization as a magical or cursed place. The structure of the Imram, then, may have served a dual purpose. On one level, it was a profound spiritual metaphor, a map of the soul's journey toward God. On another, it could have functioned as a communal data log. By framing geographic discoveries as otherworldly visions, the tales preserved critical information. They noted which islands had abundant bird eggs for food, which had fresh water from melting ice, which lands rumbled with dangerous volcanic activity, and which phantom mountains of ice should be given a wide berth. The very strangeness of the descriptions was their durability. A dry sailor's log entry about a large bird colony might be lost, but a story about an island where birds sang hymns would be told and retold for centuries, keeping the memory of that safe harbor alive in the most captivating way possible. These patterns are not random or isolated. From the Mediterranean to the Pacific to the North Atlantic, a common symbolic language emerges, a universal code for turning geography into story. The first and perhaps most urgent symbol is the whirlpool or sea monster guarding a narrow passage. We see it in the Greek Charybdis, a vortex that swallows the sea. We hear echoes of it in the Norse Hafnarfjörður, the ocean wall that crushes ships. These are not coincidental fantasies. They are the same navigational warning repeated across cultures for the same deadly phenomenon. A constricted strait where tidal forces funnel water creates violent, unpredictable currents. To a wooden ship, that hydraulic chaos is a living, hungry beast. By naming it, by giving it a form and a story, the danger becomes unforgettable. A simple note about a tricky current might be misremembered, but no sailor would ever forget the tale of the monster that waits in the Narrows. Equally universal is the symbol of the Paradise Island. In the Odyssey, it is the land of the Lotus Eaters, a place of forgetful bliss. In the Celtic Imram, it is the island of birds, a haven of plenty and peace. In Polynesian tradition, every newly found island was a gift pulled from the sea. This motif consistently points to a very real, very critical discovery, a landfall with vital resources. After weeks at sea, a place with fresh water, abundant game, or edible plants was not just a stop, it was salvation. The stories encode this life-giving quality by exaggerating it into a dreamlike state of ease or enchantment. The message is clear and consistent across oceans. This is a place that sustains life, but also a place where the comfort it offers could make you lose your purpose. The myth holds the dual truth of the discovery, its necessity and its potential peril. Then there are the rulers of the sky, the gods of wind and storm. The Greeks had Aeolus, keeper of the winds, in a leather bag. The Norse told of Odin stirring the seas. Polynesian chants name the specific winds that guide canoes. These are not just random deities. They are the personification of the most powerful and unpredictable force a mariner faces, the weather itself. By giving the wind a name, a personality, and a story, ancient cultures were doing something profoundly practical. They were creating a framework for discussing and predicting atmospheric behavior. A story about angering the wind god was a way to remember that sailing during a certain season was reckless. A chant that invoked a gentle breeze from the east was a way to preserve knowledge of favorable seasonal trade winds. The myth made the invisible tangible. It turned an abstract, deadly force into a character one could appeal to, understand, and most importantly, remember to respect. Finally, the most consistent code of all is written in the night sky. Celestial beings and objects are rarely just decoration. In the Greek tale, the constellation Scorpio becomes the fishhook of Maui, pulling islands from the sea. The Norse used the Sunstone, a crystal that read polarized light, to find the hidden sun. The star compass of the Polynesians turned the entire dome of heaven into a named mental chart. Across the board, the heavens are not a backdrop for myth, they are its primary source material. Stars are ancestors, gods, tools, and hooks. This shared practice reveals the deepest layer of the code. When you are surrounded by a featureless circle of sea, the sky is your only fixed reference. Its patterns are your map. Wrapping those patterns in story was the only way to ensure their precise positions were passed down, unchanged, through countless generations. The myth was the memory aid for the astronomical data that meant the difference between life and death. Together, these recurring motifs, whirlpools, paradise islands, wind gods, and star beings, point to a shared human method. It was not a conscious, organized conspiracy. It was a convergent evolution of memory, separate cultures facing the same existential problems on the open ocean, arrived at the same brilliant solution. They encrypted their hard-won maritime reality into the most durable format their world had, the epic narrative. They turned currents into monsters, safe harbors into enchantments, weather into deities, and stars into ancestors. This was not a loss of information, but its preservation. The flamboyant details, the supernatural encounters, were the encryption keys. They ensured the vital data within. The maps, the seasonal schedules, the warnings would be cherished, repeated, and remembered. The stories survived because they were captivating. The knowledge survived because it was hidden inside them. This approach, however, is not without its critics. A wave of skepticism naturally arises when we propose that myths are more than stories. The most common objection is a powerful one, that we are simply seeing patterns where none exist, engaging in a sophisticated form of retroactive storytelling ourselves. This is a vital caution. It is tempting, once you begin looking for codes, to see them everywhere, to turn every dragon into a volcano and every giant into a mountain. This is where the idea of euhemerism comes in, an ancient practice of rationalizing myth by claiming every god was once a great king or every monster a misunderstood animal. While our exploration shares a surface similarity, it operates on a fundamentally different principle. We are not saying the Cyclops was a one-eyed man. We are suggesting that the story of the Cyclops, its location, its hazards, and the method of escape might preserve a specific type of coastal or social danger a sailor could face. The distinction is subtle but crucial. We are not reducing myth to mere history. We are examining how history and survival knowledge could be preserved through the mechanisms of myth. The narrative is not a transparent window onto a real event. It is a sophisticated container shaped by generations of telling, designed to carry a precious and fragile cargo of information across the abyss of time. To mistake the ornate, gilded box for the treasure inside is to miss the point entirely. The stories are, first and foremost, magnificent literature. They explore universal human themes of love, loss, courage, and folly. Odysseus is a compelling character not because he follows a star chart, but because of his cunning, his pride, and his desperate longing for home. To claim the Odyssey is only a sailing manual would strip it of its soul and its power. The navigational data we propose forms not the entire body of the epic, but its skeletal framework. Think of it as the keel and ribs of a ship. You never see these parts when the vessel is sailing. They are hidden beneath the hull, but they are what give the ship its shape, its strength, and its ability to stay on course. The beautiful carving on the prow, the brightly dyed sail, the gripping tales of monsters and gods, these are the parts that capture the eye and the imagination. They are what make the ship memorable, what make people want to board it and hear its story. Yet without that hidden, functional skeleton, the whole magnificent structure would lack integrity and purpose. It would go nowhere. So it is with these ancient narratives, the proposed core of practical knowledge, the sequence of hazards, the seasonal markers, the star paths, provided a robust and unforgettable structure. Upon that armature, the culture could layer all the richness of its art, its values, and its spiritual beliefs. The story could be about a hero's pride and a god's wrath, while simultaneously, for those who needed to know, holding the memory of a dangerous current at a specific headland. One purpose does not cancel out the other. They are woven together, each strengthening the other. The myth is more resilient because it carries vital knowledge, and the knowledge is more durable because it is carried by a spellbinding myth. This perspective does not demand a one-to-one correlation for every single detail. We need not find the exact cave where a one-eyed giant supposedly lived. Instead, we look for the recurring patterns, the types of obstacles that appear at logical points in a voyage. The criticism of pattern finding is valid only if we force the evidence. The true test is whether this lens reveals a coherent, practical logic within the epic journey, a logic that would aid survival, and whether that same symbolic language appears independently in the myths of other seafaring cultures. When we see the same motifs, whirlpools as monsters, safe harbors as enchanted isles, stars as guides, appearing in the stories of Greeks, Polynesians, and Norse, we are likely seeing more than coincidence. We are witnessing the shared solution to a shared human problem, how to remember the way across the trackless and unforgiving sea. But is this grand theory anything more than a compelling story itself? The beauty of this idea is that it can be tested against the hard facts of the modern world. We are no longer limited to textual analysis. Today, we have the tools to place these ancient narratives into the very environment they describe to see if the pieces truly fit. This is where oceanography and archaeology enter the conversation, transforming speculative interpretation into a rigorous, interdisciplinary investigation. Take the timeline of a mythic voyage. When an epic states a hero sailed for 9 days after a specific event, it sounds like a poetic number. Yet, when you input that duration into a model of ancient sailing speeds, and you factor in the known dominant currents of that sea, a fascinating possibility emerges. That 9-day journey could trace a very real, efficient sailing route from one known point to another, riding the same highway of water that modern container ships still use today. The story preserves the duration because that was the lived experience of the journey. The rhythm of life at sea burned into memory. Similarly, the mention of a specific star rising at a key moment is no longer just pretty imagery. Astronomers can now run precise celestial simulations, rewinding the night sky to any date in human history. If a Polynesian chant names the star Macaulay as the guide for a voyage to Hawaii, we can calculate when that constellation would have been most prominently positioned for that exact journey. The results are often startlingly precise, locking the myth to a specific seasonal window that aligns perfectly with favorable winds and currents. The narrative was not just a story, it was a scheduled departure notice embedded in the stars. The physical evidence from archaeology provides the final, tangible piece of the puzzle. For generations, the idea that Polynesians could have intentionally sailed across thousands of miles of open ocean was met with deep skepticism by many Western scholars. It was easier to believe their dispersal was accidental, the result of helpless drift voyages. Then the discoveries began. Archaeologists uncovered the remains of ancient Polynesian voyaging canoes on distant islands, vessels built not for coastal paddling but for deep-sea endurance. More recently, experimental archaeology has put the theory to the ultimate test. Using only traditional materials and methods without modern instruments, navigators like Nainoa Thompson have successfully sailed replicated double-hulled canoes from Hawaii to Tahiti and back, using nothing but the remembered star paths, wave patterns, and bird lore preserved in their oral traditions. This was not a simulation, it was a living demonstration. The voyage proved the myths were not describing fantasy, they were encoding a fully functional, replicable science. Every chant about a star, every story about a bird's flight range, held precise, actionable data. The canoe itself, emerging from the archaeological record and recreated in the present, became the bridge that connected the mythic past to practical reality. It confirmed that the people who told these stories possessed not just the imagination, but the profound technical capability their legends implied. On the other side of the world, underwater archaeology offers another form of corroboration. While we may never find the Argo itself, the discovery of ancient shipwrecks along the proposed route of the Argonauts tells its own story. The distribution of these wrecks, the types of cargo they carried, and the ports they were linked to, paint a vivid picture of very real, very active trade networks that exactly mirror the geographic sequence of Jason's adventures. The mythic journey from Greece to Colchis follows the path of demonstrable Bronze Age commerce. The story of hostile shores and clashing rocks maps onto the historically attested dangers of that voyage. The archaeology does not prove the myth happened as written, but it powerfully validates the environment that the myth describes. It shows that the world of the epic was a world of real sailors facing real challenges, and that the narrative structure of their greatest story could indeed have served as a cognitive map for navigating that challenging, profitable world. This convergence of evidence, from the ocean's currents to the stars' ancient positions to the physical artifacts on the seafloor, moves the idea from the realm of intriguing speculation into a credible framework for understanding. It suggests that when we listen to these ancient stories, we are not just hearing the dreams of our ancestors. We are listening to the encoded echo of their lived experience, a whisper of wind and wave and starlight, carefully preserved in the most durable container our species has ever invented, the unforgettable tale. That living library of the sea was never meant to be written down. It existed in the rhythm of a chant, the gesture of a hand pointing to a star path, the shared silence of a crew watching the swell. For thousands of years, this was how humanity remembered the way across the water. But this creates a haunting truth. The stories we have been exploring, the Odyssey, the Polynesian chants, the Norse sagas, are not the rule. They are the rare, miraculous exception. They represent the tiny, fragmented fraction of a global knowledge system that managed, against all odds, to survive the transition from spoken word to written record. For every epic poem that was inscribed on clay or parchment, how many thousands of other songs, chants, and stories simply faded away on the last breath of their final keeper? Consider the scale of this loss. Across all the continents, along every coastline and river system, countless cultures developed their own intimate dialogue with their local seas. Each one possessed a unique library of oral tradition, a dense catalogue of tide lines, seasonal fish runs, safe anchorages, and storm warnings, all woven into the fabric of their daily lives and their most sacred stories. The knowledge of how to read the subtle, oily calm that precedes a hurricane in the Caribbean, the memory of which mangrove channel in the Sundarbans leads to fresh water after the monsoon, the star lore that guided boats through the labyrinth of Indonesia's islands. These were not primitive beliefs. They were sophisticated, localized sciences, refined over generations of careful observation. And the vast majority of this wisdom has vanished forever, not in a single cataclysm, but in the quiet, relentless erosion of time, cultural change, and the passing of elders. What we are left with in our surviving texts are like a few charred pages rescued from a vast, burning library. We have Homer, but we lost the songs of the Phoenician pilots who may have taught him. We have the Norse sagas, but the full oral atlas of the Sami sea hunters of the Arctic is gone. We have fragments of Polynesian star chants, but how many island names and their associated sailing directions have slipped into silence with the last navigator who knew them? This realization shifts the entire endeavor. Decoding the maritime knowledge in myths is not an academic exercise. It is an act of urgent recovery. Each time we successfully trace a mythic monster to a tidal race or a hero's journey to a viable sailing route, we are not just solving a puzzle. We are reclaiming a single, precious volume from that lost global library. We are catching the faint echo of a way of knowing that saw the environment not as a resource to be exploited, but as a living, speaking partner in the journey of survival. The surviving stories are our only bridge back to that worldview. They remind us that our ancestors were not helpless before nature, nor were they its conquerors. They were its meticulous students, and they encoded their hard-won diplomas in the only format guaranteed to last, the story that refuses to be forgotten. In listening closely to these echoes, we do more than understand the past. We recover a profound and perhaps desperately needed model for how to remember the world. The stories that survived are a testament to a profound and practical genius. They were never meant to be either pure fiction or literal history, but something far more sophisticated. These early mythological texts are hybrid creations, masterful blends of art, religion, and vital survival information. To dismiss them as primitive science is to miss their true purpose. They were not failed attempts at recording objective facts. They were a different kind of science entirely, a science of memory and meaning. This was a technology of transmission, engineered over generations to carry the most important day to a culture possessed across the unforgiving gulf of time. The goal was not accuracy in our modern sense, but fidelity, ensuring that the core lessons, the routes, the warnings, and the seasonal rhythms were remembered exactly. The fantastical elements, the monsters and gods and magical objects were not errors. They were the most efficient encryption available, turning fragile facts into unforgettable narratives. This perspective forces a fundamental shift in how we view our ancestors. We are not looking back at people who are confused about their world, telling simple stories to explain thunder. We are looking at innovators who solved one of humanity's greatest puzzles: how to preserve complex, life-saving knowledge without a written library. Their solution was elegant and resilient: weave the data into the very fabric of cultural identity, into the stories told at feasts, around fires, and to children at bedtime. The survival of the story meant the survival of the people. When we read the Odyssey not just as literature, but as a potential nautical guide, our respect deepens exponentially. It is no longer merely a tale of a man trying to get home. It becomes a legacy of countless unnamed sailors, their hard-won experience distilled and dramatized for eternity. The Polynesian star chants are not just beautiful poetry, they are rigorous celestial mathematics sung into being. The Norse sagas are not just violent adventures, they are encoded almanacs of ice and current. This realization invites us to look at the entire tapestry of ancient storytelling with new eyes. What other practical wisdom might be hidden in plain sight, waiting within the familiar tales we think we already understand? The next time you hear an old story about a journey, a monster, or a magical tool, pause for a moment. Listen past the surface. You might just hear the distant echo of the sea and the whisper of an ancient navigator still telling you the way.